on Capitol Hill for nearly 11 hours yesterday testifying about the Benghazi attacks. Blake Berman with the very latest right now in Washington. Good morning to you, Blake.
Hi there, Maria. Good morning to you as well. Hillary Clinton stayed largely stoic as a witness yesterday. She sometimes would flash a small smile when Democrats on the Benghazi committee essentially called the congressional investigation unnecessarily redundant. There were also a few clashes with Republicans who tried to depict the former Secretary of State as out of touch with the inadequate security needs at the Benghazi, Libya compound. Few new details emerged, though, from the 11-hour affair. However, one of the revelations centered around conversations in the immediate aftermath of the 2012 attack that killed 4 Americans. Emails produced by the committee show Clinton had told her daughter and the Egyptian prime minister the compound had been attacked by an al-Qaeda-like group.
I'm reading what you said. Plain language. We know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. That's as plain as it can get. That's vastly different than vicious behavior justified by internet material. Why didn't you just speak plain to the American people?
I did state clearly, and I said it again in more detail the next morning, as did the president. I'm sorry that it doesn't fit your narrative, Congressman.
Now, some of the Republican committee members charged that Clinton and the Obama administration instead preferred to blame an internet video and not terrorism in the immediate aftermath as they were staring down an election in the upcoming weeks. Maria?
Blake, thank you. Blake Berman with the latest there. And joining us right now to talk more about this is former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And Mr. Mayor, good to see you. We know what happened the days after the attack. Very clearly, we should be running the sound bites because we heard what the president said and what Secretary of State then Hillary Clinton said, that it was about a video.
So that Sunday morning, I was on the same show with Susan Rice when she announced that this was because of the Muhammad video. And I was sitting in the room getting ready to go on. And when she said it, I said a word that begins with B, the first part of which is bull. And I said that because having no inside information, the idea that they had rockets and you don't have a spontaneous demonstration with rockets. Obviously, at that very moment, the Secretary of State knew that it was a al-Qaeda attack. She had texted that 4 days earlier to her daughter, to the Prime Minister of Egypt. So she let her employee, Susan Rice, lie on national television. That was massive news for the next 3 or 4 days, and never corrected her.
And so, just then in the hearing, she said, no, she corrected it the next day, which is not true.
Well, she did not correct it the next day. The president went on and mentioned it another 4 times. Susan Rice went on national television, major news all over the place. One of your employees goes on and says, this was done because of a Muhammad video, and you know that that's not true, and you don't correct it as the Secretary of State. There's got to be a reason for that. I do this before, during, and after. Before, 4 attacks on that compound, one so big that a tank went through. She paid no attention to it. She got no additional security.
And it was September 11th.
Yeah, and the UK pulled out. So she did nothing to secure that facility. Number 2, when it happens, they don't send all forces there immediately. They say, well, they would have gotten there too late. How do you know it would have gotten there too late? If right now I'm the mayor and there's a fire, and they tell me it's a big fire, I make it a 4-alarm fire and everybody heads there. I might get there too late. I might get there on time. But I don't know it's too late at the moment that it's happening. So that's another story that is completely false. And the final one is the cover-up. The 14 days of the Muhammad video when they knew from day one it
was 14 days.
So what's the reason for all that lying? The reason for it is they kicked Gaddafi out of Libya. Hillary was the major player in that. And that turned out to be a roaring disaster. It has become even more of a disaster today. They didn't want that disaster to play out before the 2012 election. Hillary, you want to talk about the political impact from yesterday's hearing? Hillary owns Libya.
Yeah.
You put Hillary's picture right on top of Libya and say, if she had made the decision to take out Gaddafi, who was a neutered despot, all these thousands of people wouldn't have died. We wouldn't have 2 more terrorist groups that are operating in the Middle East that we know very little about. ISIS may not have emerged if they hadn't pulled out of Iraq.
That's right.
So it shows a Secretary of State. Let's even say we believe Hillary yesterday. It shows a completely uninvolved and a completely unsuccessful a disastrously unsuccessful Secretary of State running for President of the United States.
But all because of a narrative that they were portraying that terrorists were on the run, that we were before an election.
The big lie.
And the narrative was that President Obama stomped out the terrorists and it just wasn't a problem anymore. So they just couldn't admit that there was a terrorist attack and 4 Americans were dead because of terrorists. How crazy is that?
That's what we're faced with, and that's what we've been faced with the Clintons for years, haven't we? And the American people, for some reason, or half of them, are lulled into some kind of a thing about them. I mean, I watched that performance, and I said, this is either the most incompetent person I've ever seen hold the job as Secretary of State. She knew nothing about what was going on, or the biggest liar I ever saw. Take your pick.
Yeah, and Dagan.
Mr. Mayor, what do you worry about in terms of risk to the U.S., particularly here on our soil? What keeps you up at night right now? I know you think about. I
think about it all the time. The thing that kept me up when I was mayor is the same thing that keeps me up now, which is the dirty bomb, the ability to make a weapon with a small amount of nuclear material that could do massive damage in the middle of a major city or any place, an airport, any place else. I worry about that more and more as I see Iran becoming more and more nuclear. Here's my fear about Iran. Everybody's worried about rockets from Iran. My fear about Iran is it's the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. If you are the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world, what does that mean? That means you give money and arms to terrorists, right? More than anybody else do. Well, if you give them money and arms, why not give them nuclear material and then lie and claim it's not you? The Obama administration probably accept the lie. I mean, the Obama administration actually believes that the Ayatollah is going to keep his promises. If you're naive enough to think the Ayatollah is going to keep his promises, if a dirty bomb went off and Iran gave it to a group of terrorists and said we didn't, President Obama would have said, well, we have no proof. So that's what keeps me up at night. A president who is not vigilant, a Secretary of State beforehand who led us to disaster in the Middle East, and one who's just as bad, if not worse, making an agreement. We're signing an agreement with a man who has said death to Israel, death to Americans. So that is what keeps me up at night. We don't have someone really protecting us against the real dangers because they're living in some kind of fantasy world about Islamic extremist terrorism. Oh my God, I just said Islamic extremist terrorism.
Right.
Wow.
That if we get out of the Middle East, somehow that won't arrive on our shores, right?
Yeah.
We're going to leave the Middle East and leave a vacuum there.
We're going to leave the Middle East so they have plenty of time to plan to come here and kill us.
Right.
When I was with a group of SEALs the other night, and I said, when you were there and you were in Iraq and you were in Afghanistan, how much more information were we getting than we're getting now? They said we were getting, a tremendous amount of information every single day. And they said to me, if we had remained in Iraq, if Biden and the president and Hillary hadn't pulled us out, ISIS never would have emerged because we would have picked it up on day one. Why was the president scratching his head about ISIS and saying it was the JV? Why was his intelligence so poor? It was so poor because he pulled out his resources.
Two real quick questions. Number one, do you think people are connecting the dots on the Hillary testimony, and does it impact her campaign? And then I want to get your take on Paul Ryan.
Well, we need a candidate who's going to connect the dots. I mean, that's what the campaign against her should be. If she was this terrible a Secretary of State, imagine how terrible she can be as president.
And this much of a liar.
I don't know. Lying is always gets you. People get all upset if you call somebody a liar or whatever. I'll take her at her word. At her word, she was the most incompetent Secretary of State in the last 100 years.
How important is Paul Ryan getting the House Speaker job for the GOP?
I think it's very important. Paul is an extraordinary guy. First of all, he has an extraordinary mind, an extraordinary work ethic. He understands the budget, better than anyone else, and that's critical. I mean, that's the most critical battle that goes on with Congress anyway. And he's somebody that everybody respects. The people on the far right, the people in the middle.
So he'll get stuff done.
And he has shown he can work with Democrats.
Right. Mr. Mayor, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Mayor Giuliani there. We're watching markets this morning.